I was now very moral in my life, but found no rest of conscience. I now began to be esteemed in young company, who knew nothing of my mind all this while, and their esteem began to be a snare to my soul, for I soon began to be fond of carnal mirth, though I still flattered myself that if I did not get drunk, nor curse, nor swear, there would be no sin in frolicking and carnal mirth, and I thought God would indulge young people with some that I called simple or civil recreation. I still kept a round of duties, and would not suffer myself to run into any open vices, and so got along very well in time of health and prosperity. But when I was distressed or threatened by sickness, death, or heavy storms of thunder, my religion would not do, and I found there was something wanting, and would begin to repent my going so much to frolics. But when the distress was over, the devil and my own wicked heart, with the solicitations of my associates and my fondness for young company, were such strong allurements, I would again give way. And thus I got to be very wild and rude, at the same time kept up my rounds of secret prayer and reading. But God, not willing I should destroy myself, still followed me with his calls, and moved with such power upon my conscience that I could not satisfy myself with my diversions, and in the midst of my mirth sometimes would have such a sense of my lost and undone condition that I would wish myself from the company, and after it was over, when I went home, would make my promises that I would attend no more on these frolics, and would beg forgiveness for hours and hours. But when I came to have the temptation again, I would give way. No sooner would I hear the music and drink a glass of wine, but I would find my mind elevated and soon proceed to any sort of merriment or diversion that I thought was not debauched or openly vicious. But when I returned from my carnal mirth, I felt as guilty as ever, and could sometimes not close my eyes for some hours after I had gone to bed. I was one of the most unhappy creatures on earth. Sometimes I would leave the company, often speaking to the fiddler to cease from playing as if I was tired, and go out and walk about crying and praying, as if my heart would break, and beseeching God that he would not cut me off, nor give me up to the hardness of heart. Oh, what unhappy hours and nights I thus wore away. When I met sometimes with merry companions, and my heart was ready to sink, I would labor to put on as cheerful a countenance as possible, that they might not distrust anything, and sometimes would begin some discourse with young men or young women on purpose, or propose a merry song, lest the distress of my soul would be discovered or mistrusted, when at the same time I would then rather have been in a wilderness in exile than with them or any of their pleasures or enjoyments. Thus, for many months when I was in company, I would act the hypocrite and feign a merry heart, but at the same time would endeavor as much as I could to shun their company, O wretched and unhappy mortal that I was. Everything I did, and wherever I went, I was still in a storm, and yet I continued to be the chief contriver and ringleader of the frolics for many months after, though it was a toil and torment to attend them. But the devil and my own wicked heart drove me about like a slave, telling me that I must do this and do that, and bear this and bear that, and turn here and turn there, to keep my credit up and retain the esteem of my associates. And all this while I continued as strict as possible in my duties, and left no stone unturned to pacify my conscience, watching even against my thoughts, and praying continually wherever I went. For I did not think there was any sin in my conduct when I was among carnal company, because I did not take any satisfaction there, but only followed it, I thought, for sufficient reasons. But still, all that I did or could do, conscience would roar night and day. End quote. St. Augustine and Aline both emerged into the smooth waters of inner unity and peace, and I shall next ask you to consider more closely some of the peculiarities of the process of unification when it occurs. It may come gradually, or it may occur abruptly. It may come through altered feelings or through altered powers of action, or it may come through new intellectual insights, or through experiences which we shall later have to designate as mystical. However it come, it brings a characteristic sort of relief, and never such extreme relief as when it is cast into the religious mold. Happiness. Happiness, religion is only one of the ways in which men gain that gift. Easily, permanently, and successfully, it often transforms the most intolerable misery into the profoundest and most enduring happiness. But to find religion is only one out of many ways of reaching unity, and the process of remedying inner incompleteness and reducing inner discord is a general psychological process, which may take place with any sort of mental material, and need not necessarily assume the religious form. In judging of the religious types of regeneration which we are about to study, it is important to recognize that they are only one species of a genus that contains other types as well. For example, the new birth may be away from religion into incredulity, or it may be from moral scrupulosity into freedom and license. Or it may be produced by the irruption into the individual's life of some new stimulus or passion, such as love, ambition, cupidity, revenge, or patriotic devotion. In all these instances, we have precisely the same psychological form of event, a firmness, stability, and equilibrium succeeding a period of storm and stress and inconsistency. In these non-religious cases, the new man may also be born either gradually or suddenly. The French philosopher Joffre has left an eloquent memorial of his own, quote, counter-conversion, as the transition from orthodoxy to infidelity has been well styled by Mr. Starbuck. Joffre's doubts had long harassed him, but he dates his final crisis from a certain night when his disbelief grew fixed and stable, and where the immediate result was sadness at the illusions he had lost. Quote, I shall never forget that night of December, writes Joffre, in which the veil that concealed from me my own incredulity was torn. I hear again my steps in that narrow, naked chamber, where long after the hour of sleep had come, I had the habit of walking up and down. I see again that moon, half veiled by clouds, which now and again illuminated the frigid window panes. The hours of the night flowed on, and I did not note their passage. Anxiously I followed my thoughts, as from layer to layer they descended towards the foundation of my consciousness, and, scattering one by one all the illusions which until then had screened its windings from my view, made them every moment more clearly visible. Vainly I clung to these last beliefs, as a shipwrecked sailor clings to the fragments of his vessel. Vainly, frightened at the unknown void in which I was about to float, I turned with them towards my childhood, my family, my country, all that was dear and sacred to me. The inflexible current of my thought was too strong. Parents, family, memory, beliefs, it forced me to let go of everything. The investigation went on more obstinate and more severe as it drew near its term, and did not stop until the end was reached. I knew then that in the depth of my mind nothing was left that stood erect. This moment was a frightful one, and when towards morning I threw myself exhausted on my bed, I seemed to feel my earlier life, so smiling and so full, go out like a fire, and before me another life opened, somber and unpeopled, where in future I must live alone with my fatal thought which had exiled me thither, and which I was tempted to curse. The days which followed this discovery were the saddest of my life. Away down in the bottom of my heart, I believe I was always more or less skeptical about God. Skepticism grew as an undercurrent all through my early youth, but it was controlled and covered by the emotional elements in my religious growth. When I was 16, I joined the church, and I was asked if I loved God. I replied yes, as was customary and expected, but instantly, with a flash of something, spoke within me. No, you do not. I was haunted for a long time with shame and remorse for my falsehood and for my wickedness in not loving God, mingled with fear that there might be an avenging God who would punish me in some terrible way. At 19, I had an attack of tonsillitis. Before I had quite recovered, I heard told a story of a brute who had kicked his wife downstairs and then continued the operation until she became insensible. I felt the horror of the thing keenly. Instantly, this thought flashed through my mind. I have no use for a God who permits such things. This experience was followed by months of stoical indifference to the God of my previous life, mingled with feelings of positive dislike and a somewhat proud defiance of him. I still thought there might be a God. If so, he would probably damn me, but I should have to stand it. I felt very little fear and no desire to propitiate him. I have never had any personal relations with him since this painful experience. End quote. The second case exemplifies how small an additional stimulus will overthrow the mind into a new state of equilibrium when the process of preparation and incubation has proceeded far enough. It is like the proverbial last straw added to the camel's burden, or that touch of a needle which makes the salt in a supersaturated fluid suddenly begin to crystallize out. Tolstoy writes, S., a frank and intelligent man, told me as follows how he ceased to believe. He was 26 years old when one day on a hunting expedition, the time for sleeping having come, he set himself to pray according to the custom he had held from childhood. His brother, who was hunting with him, lay upon the hay and looked at him. When S. had finished his prayer and was turning to sleep, the brother said, "Do you still keep up that thing?" Nothing more was said, but since that day, now more than 30 years ago, S. has never prayed again. He never takes communion, and he does not go to church. All this, not because he became acquainted with the convictions of his brother which he then and there adopted, not because he made any new resolution in his soul, but merely because the words spoken by his brother were like the light push of a finger against a leaning wall already about to tumble by its own weight. These words but showed him that the place wherein he supposed religion dwelt in him had long been empty, and that the sentences he uttered, the crosses and bows which he made during his prayer, were actions with no inner sense. Having once seized their absurdity, he could no longer keep them up. End quote. I subjoin an additional document which has come into my possession, and which represents in a vivid way what is probably a very frequent sort of conversion, if the opposite of falling in love, falling out of love, may be so termed. Falling in love also conforms frequently to this type, a latent process of unconscious preparation, often preceding a sudden awakening to the fact that the mischief is irretrievably done. The free and easy tone in this narrative gives it a sincerity that speaks for itself. Quote, "For 2 years of this time, I went through a very bad experience which almost drove me mad. I had fallen violently in love with a girl who, young as she was, had a spirit of coquetry like a cat. As I look back on her now, I hate her, and wonder how I could ever have fallen so low as to be worked upon to such an extent by her attractions. Nevertheless, I fell into a singular fever, could think of nothing else. Whenever I was alone, I pictured her attractions, and spent most of the time when I should have been working in recalling our previous interviews and imagining future conversations. She was very pretty, good-humored, and jolly to the last degree, and intensely pleased with my admiration. Would give me no decided answer, yes or no, and the queer thing about it was that whilst pursuing for her hand, I secretly knew all along that she was unfit to be a wife for me, and that she never would say yes. Although for a year we took our meals at the same boarding house, so that I saw her continually and familiarly, our closer relations had to be largely on the sly, and this fact, together with my jealousy of another one of her male admirers, and my own conscience despising me for my uncontrollable weakness, made me so nervous and sleepless that I really thought I should become insane. I understand well those young men murdering their sweethearts, which appear so often in the papers. Nevertheless, I did love her passionately, and in some ways she did deserve it. The queer thing was the sudden and unexpected way in which it all stopped. I was going to my work after breakfast one morning, thinking as usual of her and of my misery, when, just as if some outside power laid hold of me, I found myself turning round and almost running to my room, where I immediately got out all the relics of her which I possessed, including some hair, all her notes and letters and ambrotypes on glass. The former I made a fire of. The latter I actually crushed beneath my heel in a sort of fierce joy of revenge and punishment. I now loathed and despised her altogether, and as for myself, I felt as if a load of disease had suddenly been removed from me. That was the end. I never spoke to her or wrote to her again in all the subsequent years, and I have never had a single moment of loving thought towards one for so many months entirely filled my heart. In fact, I have always rather hated her memory, though now I can see that I had gone unnecessarily far in that direction. At any rate, from that happy morning onward, I regained possession of my own proper soul, and have never since fallen into any similar trap. End quote. This seems to me an unusually clear example of two different levels of personality, inconsistent in their dictates, yet so well balanced against each other as for a long time to fill the life with discord and dissatisfaction. At last, not gradually, but in a sudden crisis, the unstable equilibrium is resolved, and this happens so unexpectedly that it is as if, to use the writer's words, some outside power laid hold. Professor Starbuck gives an analogous case, and a converse case of hatred suddenly turning into love in his Psychology of Religion, page 141. Compare the other highly curious instances which he gives on page 137 to 144 of sudden non-religious alterations of habit or character. He seems right in conceiving all such sudden changes as results of a special cerebral functions. He seems right in conceiving all such sudden changes as results of special cerebral functions unconsciously developing until they are ready to play a controlling part when they make irruption into the conscious life. When we treat of sudden conversion, I shall make as much use as I can of this hypothesis of subconscious incubation.